Tucker Carlson was speaking at Turning Point USA last night. The speech was a barn burner, and he came right on out and said that Jeffrey Epstein was running a blackmail operation on behalf of Israel. And the reason the files are being withheld is that most people of importance are on there. The instant I saw that photo, I said, this is a fake, because nowhere in that photo, on the white sleeve of his shirt, on his hand, on the gun, was there a single drop of blood. And suicide by gunshot to the mouth is a very, very messy affair. And I remember seeing some of the guys from CNN listening very intently, and that night started getting threatening phone calls. The very next day, the owner of the company I'd been working for fired me right in the middle of a production on which I was doing a really good job. And at that point, nobody in Hollywood would talk to me. People I'd known for years would cross the street to avoid being seen with me. And this sort of thing does happen all the time. One thing I've come to understand is that Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. Just over and over and over again, we see wars started with these lies, because otherwise people won't go along with it. I mean, I remember a quote by George Carlin. He says, I have some rules, and rule number one is I never believe anything the government tells me. It's a wise rule from a wise man.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Michael Rivero. Michael is a veteran in the media space, serving as a writer, radio host, and founder of whatreallyhappened.com. Michael, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I first off wanted to say that my hat's off to you for doing what you do, and really enjoy your website. I think it's fascinating. I think it's just mind-boggling to me how much is suppressed, if you will, or at the very least not something that most people are aware of, if you will. And of course, you've produced some videos. One of them is All Wars Are Banker Wars, which I thought is just
I need to do a correction on that. A guy named Zane Henry made the actual video using a soundtrack from my radio show. So I didn't actually produce that video, but I'm certainly glad it's out there, because that video and the article that it's based on, I think, have proven to be one of the most influential things that I've done.
Absolutely. Well, I figured we'd start off with your current take on the world, whether you want to go into geopolitics or the state of society, wherever you'd like to start to take it.
Well, the state of the society is in chaos right now, and that is coming on this whole liberal woke situation. They're sexualizing children in school, and our educational standards have collapsed, and it's not education anymore, it's indoctrination. As for current events here, I think the uproar over the Epstein files is definitely taking off. And Tucker Carlson was speaking at Turning Point USA last night. The speech was a barn burner, and he came right on out and said that Jeffrey Epstein was running a blackmail operation on behalf of Israel. And the reason the files are being withheld is that most people of importance are on there. We know that Bill Clinton went to the island. We know that quite a few, senators, whatever, presidents have gone there. And I don't think they went down there to get a suntan. So the fact that Pam Bondi, after saying the files were on her desk and we're reviewing them, all of a sudden comes out and says, no, there's no files, and Epstein definitely committed suicide. And then followed it up with this videotape, supposedly of Epstein's prison cell door. And first of all, it wasn't the door, because Epstein's cell had a window in the door, and the ones in the video do not. Then it turned out there were chunks missing from the timestamp on the video, and video engineers looked at it and said, this has been pieced together from several other pieces of video, and it was edited in Adobe Premiere Pro. And so it's just another fake. As cover-ups go, and you think after all these years, the government would know how to do a convincing cover-up. This is one of the most sloppy, botched-up jobs I've seen, since the Vincent Foster case. And people are very angry. And somebody miscalculated the public's reaction to this. And I think that is that the vast majority of people whom I would call normal, and I'm going to get called judgmental by the woke crowd for this. We have very strong protective instincts toward children. And the people who are doing this Epstein Island situation and going on down there to diddle with little children clearly do not. There is something wrong with somebody who finds children sexually attractive. And I think people are very, very angry, first of all, at the assaults on the children. And second, this is the most obvious case of government lying to us in recent memory.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that as I have been on this journey, if you will, kind of venturing more and more down the rabbit hole, listening to alternative media, different takes on things. One of the things that's become ever more present is this pedophilia eccentric, call it cabal or what have you, that is going on, and it's striking how many testimonies from people there are on the web, although it's not going to be the first or second result on when you Google it. People talking about all sorts of heinous things going on. Might lose some people in the audience, but you hear. I had John Waters on, who is, for those who don't know, prominent Irish writer, journalist, etc. And he mentioned something again that was as it relates to like a satanic thing. And I keep hearing this from people, and I'm trying to understand why I'm hearing that. And then that also has been tied in with elements of Epstein stuff. It's I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just a funky world that we live in.
Well, I mean, let's get back to the Israel connection and the blackmail. And first of all, anybody who's going to go into either Epstein's mansions or his island, had to know they were at risk of being recorded and could be blackmailed. And I don't know, maybe part of the initiation into the upper levels of power is allowing yourself to have a compromising video shot of you so that you can be relied on to do as you're told.
I've heard a bit about that going on over in Hollywood, and I know you were in the entertainment industry and such. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of that going on in Hollywood, and I got to see some of it. And everybody loves the fame and the money, but the real coin of the realm in Hollywood is sex and who's willing and who's not willing to do it. Do you remember the Heidi Fleiss scandal?
I do not.
Okay, she was known as the Hollywood Madam, and she associated with some of the top producers, executives in the studios, and provided girls to them. And then she got busted, and everybody was in a total panic, not because of the executives in her little black book, but how many of her working girls had gone on to be big name box office stars, and that would have really been a serious situation if it had gotten out to the general public, which it never did.
Wow, when was this exactly?
Oh, like 35, 40 years ago. It was before I left Hollywood.
You mentioned that you were chastised.
Yeah, I was. My expertise in filmmaking is visual effects, later computer animation. And I was working on a project, and the company I was doing the work for was in the same building as CNN Hollywood. And this was in regard to White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, who was found dead in Fort Marcy Park and declared a suicide. And a lot of people were scratching their heads because, as we hear with so many of these others, he wasn't suicidal. He was planning to resign because he wasn't happy with things in the White House. And then he winds up in Fort Marcy Park. And the White House leaked a photo to Reuters showing Foster's arm, hand, and the gun that he supposedly killed himself with. And part of my job is knowing what looks real and what doesn't look real. And the instant I saw that photo, I said, this is a fake, because nowhere in that photo, on the white sleeve of his shirt, on his hand, on the gun, was there a single drop of blood. And suicide by gunshot to the mouth is a very, very messy affair. I mean, you've got blood and organic material and teeth flying out at hundreds of feet per second. And even the first responders at the scene, noticed that there didn't really seem to be the amount of blood they would expect from a suicide by gunshot to the mouth, which tells us that Vincent Foster was dead by other means before the gun was fired into his mouth. And by the way, the FBI, when they examined the gun, did not find any traces of blood or fingerprints on the gun. And somehow I don't think Vincent Foster wiped it clean after it was used. So I shared that with some of my coworkers at this little outdoor cafe that we used for lunch. And I remember seeing some of the guys from CNN listening very intently. And that night started getting threatening phone calls. Um, the very next day, the owner of the company I'd been working for fired me right in the middle of a production on which I was doing a really good job. And at that point, nobody in Hollywood would talk to me. People I'd known for years would cross the street to avoid being seen with me. And this sort of thing does happen all the time. Um, Back in the 60s, it happened to actress Jean Simmons. And let's see, no, I got the name wrong. Um, anyway, she was a very popular actress. She was in the first airport movie, um, played Seberg, Jean Seberg, that was the name. And yeah, she was in favor of civil rights at a time when the Nixon White House was trying to stir up racial divide, like our current government is doing, to keep us divided and at war with each other, rather than really take a good look at what the government had been doing. And they planted a phony story in the LA Times using Joyce Haber, um, that Jean was pregnant by one of the Black Panthers. And even though the 60s was all about the sexual revolution, interracial sex was still kind of a tacky no-no, let alone when you're married to somebody. And the shock of the story caused her to miscarry. Now, her husband was a French diplomat and threatened to turn this into an international incident over what the FBI had done, because the paperwork came out saying that, yes, this had all been part of the COINTELPRO operations. And for one of the very, very few times in its existence, the FBI was forced to apologize. So anyway, I all of a sudden had a lot of free time on my hand. And that's when I started my first political website, which was called Rancho Runamucka, and then later on revised the name to whatreallyhappened.com. And I've been speaking or posting truth to power pretty much ever since over the last 30 years.
How has being in this space, I guess, changed your perception of the world?
Well, one thing I've come to understand is that Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. And if you go back and you look at all the times we were lied to, no, the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Great Britain at the time she was sunk. And actually, divers got into the hold in 2008 and found it loaded with military materials. The German embassy in New York actually took out ads in the newspapers warning people not to book passage on the Lusitania because, in their view, she was a legitimate target of war. And that's one of the big lies. Pearl Harbor being a total surprise, that's another one. Uh, Roosevelt spent an entire year goading the Japanese into the attack, following an 8-step plan by Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. And Roosevelt wanted that war to get the United States into the war, not just with Japan, but with Germany, because Japan and Germany were allies at that time. So that's a big whopping lie. Most of us probably remember the stories about Saddam having weapons of mass destruction, and we have to go on in and take him out. And just over and over and over again, we see wars started with these lies, and because otherwise people won't go along with it. I mean, they were talking about, Saddam can take out Europe with a nuclear bomb in 45 minutes, and then we invaded, hung Saddam, and no weapons of mass destruction were ever found. I mean, that's the way, sadly, the government has been operating. And I remember a quote by George Carlin. He says, I have some rules, and rule number one is I never believe anything the government tells me. It's a wise rule from a wise man.
Yeah, I've mentioned it ad nauseum with other people how I've had a complete, kind of paradigm shift as it relates to, someone being raised like in a, kind of a from a military family and such, and watching, kind of conservative, Fox and things of that nature, to really kind of questioning again the prevailing narrative out there. I found those points that you brought up striking. I remember having Martin Armstrong on. He kind of dived into that Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, things of that nature. Find it fascinating, even with Gaddafi and who's the other gentleman? Well, obviously you mentioned Saddam. Gaddafi wanted to deviate from the from the current financial establishment. I think he wanted to
Yes.
do like a gold-backed dinar or something, and
Yes, he did. And
Pan-African
all of the
thing.
African countries said, we want to get on board with that because we're tired of private banks that create money out of thin air and then loan it into circulation at interest. And that's really what lies at the heart of all of this. It's all about harvesting as much wealth from the population as you can.
When did you first kind of get introduced to the article / video that you did, All Wars Are Banker Wars, like just that whole concept?
Well, it was an article I wrote for the website, and did a lot of research on that, and I began to see this common thread that war is a racket, as Smedley Butler said, and even Eisenhower in his farewell address warned us about the power of the military-industrial complex. So as long as the military-industrial complex has that kind of political clout, there's always going to be wars, and most of them are not justified. Russia's not a threat to us. The United States and Europe are virtually bankrupt. They're being destroyed by open border immigration. Putin's got enough on his hands taking care of Russia. He doesn't need to take on Europe and America's problems as well. But that's the mantra we're going to hear. Russia's coming. Russia's coming. They're going to destroy us. They're going to eat our babies alive and all that other stuff. And there was some outrageous propaganda along that same lines during World War II that the Nazis were eating babies.
I didn't know about that last part. It kind of reminds me, I actually have Hemingway's quote. The first panacea for a mismanaged nation is inflation of the currency. The second is war. And I don't know when he released, I don't know that was in the 30s, pre-World War II, but
Yeah.
That's pretty much in line with what you're getting at. As it relates to Russia and things of that nature, obviously we saw the stuff that occurred over in Iran, and it is interesting how you have North Korea that has a nuke, and others as well, but there's no attempt to negotiate and then bomb them like we did with Iran.
Because they
I
actually
don't.
do have nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Israel has been screaming that Iran is just weeks away from a nuclear bomb since the 1980s. And they don't have one. The IAEA says they're not building one. All of the US intelligence agencies are saying there's no indication of nuclear weapons development. And yet that's what we're going to hear on the corporate media. Iran is a nuclear threat. And they're already getting ready to go back in and bomb again because Trump said, we got it all. We took care of the problem. And Netanyahu said, no, you don't. You got to go bomb them for us again.
So was that like a means for Trump to just kind of pacify neocons and such, so he can pass the big bill kind of stuff, you think?
Yeah, that may have been part of the political structure, but I think Trump realizes how the American people are tired of all these constant wars, especially wars fought on behalf of Israel, not to mention all the financial support that Israel gets from us.
Yeah, it's pretty striking. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have been tracking that. Even guests on Tucker Carlson's show as it relates to AIPAC, things of that nature. Pretty spooky how entrenched things are, and just in general.
Well, it really is. And then, of course, at the same time, you've got Israel carrying out the world's best publicized genocide in Gaza. And we're all seeing world leaders, with few exceptions, just sort of saying it's okay. Israel can kill all the Palestinians because of the Holocaust. And, like I said, people have uh, some protective instincts about children. And there are a lot of children being killed by Israel right now.
I know we kind of touched on it earlier, and I don't know if you want to go very much down that rabbit hole, but you hear a lot about the human trafficking going on, kids on the border who've been usurped, and they don't know what happened to them, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, that's another big problem with the open borders. I mean, first of all, we got flooded with a lot of illegal immigrants who are now rioting to not be sent home, um, and brought in a lot of diseases that previously had been eradicated in the country. In fact, a guy in Arizona just died of the Black Death. And that's the first time that's happened since 2007. And, all these immigrants being given preferential hiring treatment as coders and so forth. And it's displacing Americans from American jobs. And, that's not what's supposed to happen. And, the Democrats are out there screaming, well, who will pick our cotton? I mean, who will pick our crops if you take away our illegal immigrants? But the fact of the matter is that the majority of farm work today is done by machines. They harvest tomatoes, they harvest blueberries, machines harvest corn. The only crop that can't be successfully harvested with machines are strawberries because of how delicate they are. But yeah, this is an attack on our sovereignty. And I think ultimately it's part of this push for a global government. And in order to have a global government, Russia, China, and the United States have to be brought down. The fastest way to do that is to get a third world war going.
Okay, so can you dive into that? And also, real quick, you mentioned the U.S., Russia, and China need to go down. And I'm assuming, yeah, you're obviously really the transnationalists, globalists.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm against globalism and a one world government simply because there are no political alternatives under such a system. This is what you've got. Just stay in your place and accept it. And I mean, look how corrupt our own government is. And then imagine the corruption that you would see in a one world government. I mean, it would just be off the charts. And a one world government is going to have to impose a harsh dictatorship just to deal with the circumstances under which it was formed.
How would you describe the existing power structure? I guess in your own words, and who behind the scenes, you don't not necessarily names per se, but who or what groups do you see as exercising this agenda?
Well, clearly the intelligence agencies are calling a lot of the shots. That's why John F. Kennedy wanted to take the agency apart. Um, Jeff Epstein himself admitted working for CIA, and more documents have come out saying that yes, he was also working with Mossad. And Ghislaine Maxwell was also Mossad through her father, Robert Maxwell, who was a known Mossad agent. So, yeah, the spooks are kind of running the country.
What if it is released? How do you see that? Obviously the Epstein files and things of that nature. How do you see that? Impacting society.
Well, like I said, a lot of people are outraged because this is being done to children, and it's really underscoring the degree to which we're being lied to by the media and our own government. And excuse me, looking at
Gotcha.
social media, the anger is just there over the cover up.
I know there's obviously been a lot of mention of the Clintons being involved in that. I know on your website you have a lot of articles that I think are very interesting and enlightening pertaining to the Clintons. I don't know if you care to unpack that.
Well, I focused on the Clintons back when I first started the website because it was, the Clintons who had me blacklisted out of Hollywood. And the more I dug, the worse and worse things I found until I reached a point where I just said, this country is nothing at all like we're taught it is in school and on TV and movies. And it really is as if organized crime took over the US government.
Can you like dive into that more? I'm just kind of curious to learn more about it.
Well, the open borders, the defunding of the police, um, the wrist slap treatment being given to criminals. Uh, this is not the behavior of government that's working for we the people. This is a government that's working for its sponsors. And, organized crime has tried to take over the government before, certainly during Prohibition. They did a great deal of it. And we saw more of that happen during a drug prohibition, where the CIA had been dealing with the mafia going back to World War II, contracting with them to protect the docks from saboteurs. Um, they worked with the mafia to try and assassinate Fidel Castro. And, our government is like one of the biggest drug dealers, drug smugglers in the world. I mean, Gary Webb pointed that out in his series of articles, Dark Alliance, for which he was suicided with 2 bullets to the head. And, we had Air America. Okay, we're reconnecting. Can you still see me?
Yeah, yep, I can see you. We're good.
Okay, I got a message saying reconnecting. Okay, so you had Air America bringing heroin in back from Vietnam. Then, when the Vietnam War was over, you had the CIA rather, running cocaine up from South and Central America into the United States. Specifically, one of the destination points was the airport at Mena, Arkansas, under then Governor Bill Clinton. And I'm rather glad that Tom Cruise made that movie, Made in America, because it tells a very accurate story of Barry Seal, who was one of those pilots that was involved on those flights. And I mean, there have been a lot of attempts to get this stuff out there. There was a book, Compromised Clinton, Bush, and the CIA. There was um, an article that was written for the Washington Post about how Bush and Clinton had been involved in drug running. And the Washington Post, even though it had passed fact check with the lawyers, they simply spiked the story. So, yeah, media exists to protect the image of the government.
As it relates to Clinton's, I mentioned earlier that I found the article that you did as it relates to the Clinton kill list, if you will, to
Yeah.
be again not only spooky but just like wow, like that's I mean it just sounds insane. What could you share about your findings and things of that nature?
Well, the Clinton body count was simply a list of biographies of people who died under strange circumstances that were connected with the Clintons. Um, One was Mary Mahoney, who'd been an intern at the White House, and apparently Bill Clinton hit on her. So she left the White House and went to work at a Starbucks, was then killed in what was claimed to be a botched robbery. One of my favorite stories is a gentleman who was flying to meet a reporter with some dirt on the Clintons, and his own plane developed an engine problem after leaving the airport. He was able to turn around, safely land, rented another plane, took off, that plane exploded.
That's as it relates to other circumstances or circumstantial deaths and things of that nature. Anything else you care to share, whether that's Clinton related or other individuals?
Well, Ron Brown, um, that appeared to be a takedown of the entire aircraft because Ron Brown was threatening to go public. And he'd actually told Bill Clinton, if I go down, you'll go down with me. And one of the most telling videos that came out of that was Bill Clinton laughing as he left the memorial service for Ron Brown. Then he sees the news cameras and he immediately goes into his tear act. Just pathetic.
Yeah. How has I guess since you've been in this space and with the website, have you ever felt like your life was in jeopardy in some capacity, or how has that negatively impacted you? If you care to share that.
Well, early on, there were only a few of us truth activists out there. And yes, I was threatened. And there were times when I was very concerned. And that's why we left Southern California and moved up to Washington State, up in the Cascade Mountains. Pardon me. And then eventually I got a call from a production company in Hawaii um, that didn't care if the White House hated my guts, and so we moved to Hawaii, and I got into let's see, Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, a bunch of other stuff. Started my own production company, and I was the visual effects producer on Lost for 4 seasons. So,
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. Do you ever have you ever like reflected and been like, well, maybe I should have just gone along and not
oh,
stuck my head
oh,
out or what?
many times. Um, but back then when that Vince Foster photo came on TV, I still believe this image that the vast majority of people in government were honest and something would be done about it. And it was kind of like an earlier version of see something, say something. And I saw something and I said something. And my career in Hollywood came to an abrupt end.
Do you think it's been? Do you think the environment is still the same? Where if you talk about certain things, and candidly, there are things that I am very interested in talking with people about, but right now I'll only talk off camera about those things because, uh, yeah, it's there's so many rabbit holes, Michael.
Well, there are things I won't talk about or post publicly. Um, First, because the skill at being a rabble rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to listen to and what they're not ready to listen to. And second, I've had a lot of uh, people come to me and say, I've got this and I've got that evidence. And my reply is, I'm not going to use it because it could get traced back to you. So I'm not a person who burns sources. Of course, here in Indiana, nobody knocks on the door anymore.
Sure. What are some other topics perhaps that we haven't covered that, and you don't need to get into the nuances per se for obvious reasons, but certain topics that perhaps some of these people have alluded to, so on and so forth?
Well, the big one is whatever happened to this audit of the gold in Fort Knox? Because that was going to be a really big thing here. And there are suspicions that the gold isn't actually there. There hasn't been an audit of the gold in Fort Knox for over 50 years. They did hold a press conference, I think it was back in 70s or 80s, where they invited the press to look, and they opened one door to a wall of gold bricks, but nobody was allowed to touch them. Nobody was allowed to test them for purity, and it's a huge cover up. And we covered this on the History Channel series America's Book of Secrets on the episode The Gold Conspiracy. And yeah, there's been a lot of funny goings on in the gold and the economy as a whole.
Well, as it relates to gold, sound money. What are your thoughts on the financial? I guess on the current. Well, we're aware that we're heavily in debt and such. The West is, but where do you see the puck going? Where do you see things going? Do you see sound money, entering the foray or stable coin or Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on
Well,
currencies?
we should have a stable currency based on, um, something of value like gold, silver, or even electricity. Um, but, in 1913, a corrupt government and a corrupt president sold us into the slavery of the exact same kind of banking system the American Revolution was fought to free us from. And if you really think carefully about what's going on, where the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air and loans it into circulation at interest, uh, there's always going to be more money owed to that bank than is actually in existence. And that's what drives inflation up. Prior to the Federal Reserve, inflation was very much under control. And after the Fed, it started to really take off. And then after the Nixon shock, where he disconnected the dollar from gold, it really just took right off. And there's no way to get out of this debt short of nationalizing the bank.
Yeah, I've listened to. I've really enjoyed listening to Alex Craner. Tom Luongo's kind of covered it, and I'm trying to think of who else was the other person who's kind of died. Ian Burlingame has, and how it all kind of ties in to the Bank of England, and then I guess the Dutch, some of the Dutch, and then there's been talk of the Venetian, so to speak, how capital, how the banking, industry has become increasingly more entrenched, if you will, as it relates to banks and things of that nature. I mean, how would you describe? And perhaps I'm already going over stuff we already talked about, but I'm just trying to better understand your viewpoint on kind of that power structure, if you will. That pyramid pyramid of
Well,
power.
when you have a bank that's given the authority to create its own money, it's going to abuse that authority. And Trump's current argument with the Fed Chairman Powell is a good example because the economic numbers are looking good. And normally the Federal Reserve would reduce interest rates to adjust for that. But what Powell is doing is keeping the interest rates up I think he wants the economy to turn bad so they can blame Trump for it. But it is a giant global pyramid, and it goes all the way up to the top to the central bank of all central banks, the Bank of International Settlements. And this ties in with several very very wealthy families whose net worth is in the trillions of dollars, but they don't like to advertise that because people are going to start wondering how did they get all of that money? And it's a dishonest banking system.
I think it's interesting. I'm not like overly religious per se, but I do think it's interesting how, from a religious sense, like, or Christianity, how there's at least going back to like the Middle Ages and such, they did not want usury, they did not want money lending with interest, or, and I
Yes.
guess it's been interpreted as high interest, if you will. And how in Islam, I remember a potential client I was going to work with when I was in commercial real estate. He was a Muslim, and he would not do a loan for a commercial property. I just thought that was interesting, and how in other groups people recognize the ills that debt and debt slavery and such brings to society.
Well, there was a line in the movie called The International that says the very essence of the banking industry is to keep us all, whether we be individuals or nations, slaves to debt. That's what they're in the business of doing, enslaving people with their paper money. And, it's all under the control of a very few, very, very wealthy families. They don't want things to change at all. In fact, if you look carefully at some of the countries we've been attacking, they are the few countries that do not have a Rothschild controlled central bank. And that's why they get targeted. Um, and again, getting back to all wars are bankers' wars, anybody who challenges the banks winds up dead. Going back to the John F. Kennedy assassination, um, everyone's saying, oh, Cuba did it, Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Actually, there were a lot of players. Historical events and assassinations never happen for just one reason. You get a group of people with their own agendas, and they all overlap at making something happen, and it happens. And in one case, John F. Kennedy had issued a new value based currency called the United States note, about $4 billion worth in circulation. And this was money that was circulating, not creating interest for the Federal Reserve. So John F. Kennedy gets assassinated. They formed the Warren Commission to head off all other investigations. And on that Warren Commission was John J. McCloy, president of the World Bank and president of the Chase Manhattan Bank. Now, he may be an excellent banker, but why is he on the Warren Commission, which is investigating a homicide? So there appears to have been some dickering to make sure that the real reasons for the assassination never came out.
And it's unfortunate what happened to his brother as well. I remember, I believe I had Larry Johnson on last time, and he mentioned about how Bobby Kennedy wanted to have AIPAC. I'm forgetting the vernacular or the term he used, but have it where they had to file as a outside lobby or something of that nature. That was yet
Yes.
another wrinkle.
Well, so did John F. Kennedy. He wanted them to register as a foreign agent. Bobby Kennedy's threat to the system was that if he became president, and it looked like he was going to, he was going to reopen the investigation into the John F. Kennedy assassination. And that was a can of worms that nobody wanted opened.
Of course, and circling back to the Epstein thing, same thing with I think it's interesting. I just saw it. I don't know if he's resigned, but Dan Bongino and then Kash Patel, taking one position, and then it seems there's been an about face as it relates to wanting to release or dive in more, and there's been contention.
Yeah, it's a real fight here. And the White House, of course, is siding with Pam Bondi. And well, once Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are out of the FBI, it's going to be hard to keep them quiet about what was really going on in there. So we'll see what happens there. But this is a scandal that could shatter the federal government. And a lot of people are saying that might be a good thing.
Do you okay as it relates to this scandal, and hypothetically, if it were to be release, and I guess even if it weren't, there's obviously a lot of talk of fourth turning stuff of there being a civil strife in the
Yes.
West. Could you share your thoughts on that? Where you see things in the coming years?
Well, the battery's kind of low on my crystal ball, but we're already seeing civil strife along the southern border and out west. And it's not going to take much more of a push. I mean, you've got Democrats out there openly calling for violence against conservatives. So we're getting very, very close to the precipice. And yeah, if the Epstein files are leaked, which I think is the only way we're ever going to see them, uh, it's going to cause some serious political problems for the entire government. It's already causing serious political problems for Donald Trump because nobody's believing that Pam Bondi did this all on her own. She's simply doing as she's told. But I think Trump is going to throw her under the bus to save himself.
What's your thoughts on, or what are your thoughts on Trump?
I'm very disappointed in him. I supported him during his first term, and I supported his reelection. And he came into office saying a lot of really good things that I was hoping was going to happen. And it hasn't. I mean, the audit into the Fort Knox, that got called off. The Epstein files are not being released, which was something that he promised was going to happen. And he's antagonizing everybody around the world. And now he's talking war with China. And that's going to be a disaster. The United States has drawn down its military stockpiles supporting Ukraine and Israel. And now they're talking about direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. China and Russia have moved together. So the United States, in my opinion, cannot win a war against both Russia and China together. And whoever realizes they're losing conventionally first is going to start turning those little brass keys in the missile silos.
I think it's so interesting how the West has made the BRICS nations even stronger. It's done the opposite of what they wanted, of course, which is to subvert and to subdue them, do a regime change, things of that nature, and how it's ironically with the seizure of Russian assets and things of that nature. And I don't agree with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That said, I understand the rationale behind that, and there's more to the story that's not conveyed to the general public in the West. But I do think it is kind of an irony that it's made them even stronger and resilient.
Well, I think the whole world is starting to realize that the villain in the room is Israel and its vassal state, the United States. As far as Ukraine, that all goes back to 2014 when the U.S. backed a coup d'etat against the democratically elected president Yanukovych and replaced him with Pedro Poroshenko, whose qualifications for high office is that he makes chocolates. And then later on replaced him with Zelensky, whose qualifications for office include playing a piano with his private parts. So it's all for show. And the U.S. clearly underestimated both Russia and Iran, and now they're in trouble.
Yeah, I saw that. It looked like Trump was, obviously Trump had pitched that he's going to end the war in Ukraine when he gets elected. Then there was talk of, then I believe, just not even like a month ago, give or take, there was the cessation of weapons and such being sent over to help NATO with Ukraine. And then now we're sending over, I think it's like 300 billion or something like that.
Correct.
So with that going on, then you mentioned China and Taiwan. I mean, care to dive into that a little bit as relates to, some of the nuances there for the audience?
Well, the U.S. interest in Taiwan, besides they make excellent electronics, is the U.S. wants to project power all the way across the Pacific Ocean and not stop at Hawaii, not stop at Guam. They want to basically make Taiwan an American military outpost right up next to China. China's obviously not happy with that idea. And that's the real goal, is to break Taiwan away from China and militarize it.
I think Larry, again, I'm referencing Larry Johnson. He's fresh right now in my mind with what he said. I think he said, I don't know, it was in 71 or 72, the U.S. said, hey, Taiwan is part of China.
Mm.
That's yours. And then there's been a reneging of it.
Yes. Yes, there have. Well, this is one of the reasons why nobody in the world trusts the United States anymore. We've had statements coming out from like Iran saying, we're not going to negotiate with the United States. We can't trust anything they say. And they're absolutely right. I mean, Trump and Iran were negotiating a new nuclear treaty, and Israel's just attacked right in the middle of that. And you don't do that and expect people to say, all right, let's go back to the negotiating table.
It seems, I'm really into history for those who haven't already picked up on it. I find it interesting, and I'm really interested in military history and such. The civility, in some degrees, how adversaries would treat one another. Going back like pre-20th century, certain courtesies, certain things, even if
Mm-hmm.
we're a foe. Even in duels, if you kind of look into the nature of duels in society, and it just seems like, and I'm using that as a reference point to tie in with Trump and Iran, like how you're negotiating and then you make an attack and then you want to renegotiate. But also with society as a whole, it's become less. There's less courtesies. There's less.
Less civility.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That's civility is definitely missing from our culture today. And again, a lot of that came out of the liberal woke movement that thinks screaming at other people is how you get what you want.
I think about even my generation. I'm a millennial, of course. How I'm single guy, and I look at the dating world. I look at all the stuff that goes on with what we just talked about. The banking system, the societal breakdown, and just culture and how things are. And I think about that, how that's trickled down to just the younger generations, if you will, and family formation, and the inflation, and all these things. And it's amazing how so much of it stems from just what we discussed, and how it's just created a lot of challenges. And you see a lot of, especially for Gen Z and even millennials, a lot of mental health stuff, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
inaccessibility to housing. People aren't having kids, really. People are delaying it. And I just think it's striking. It all kind of ties in ties in with that, explains it.
This country is in serious trouble. There's no question about it. And, aggravating the situation, there is now evidence showing that these COVID mRNA shots cause brain damage. And that may be why we're seeing so much violence uh, in schools and shopping malls, things like that. Um, you know, open robberies in stores, and yeah, it's not helped by the fact that these people seldom get sent to jail.
Speaking of COVID, I was watching a video of it was an Englishman. He was, I think, it was a coroner. No, he wasn't a coroner. He was, he was a funeral director. I guess that's the term. He was mentioning that apparently people that have succumbed to COVID, or that he was told that, hey, you need to put COVID down or whatever. But he also noticed when he did his embalming that there was there. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the blood or the organs. Something was odd or different about it. And so I think we're going to continue to hear more about the impact, the impacts. And it might even be a, hey, 20 years from now, hey, we're something like some infomercial. Did you take the COVID vaccine? Well, call this number. Who knows?
You may be entitled to a settlement. Yeah, you're talking about these white fibrous, long, stringy clots that are found in the blood veins. And the problem is that the RNA technology is very dangerous because RNA can mutate very rapidly. Now, in our bodies, RNA carries the instructions from the DNA to protein synthesis, and that happens in a split second. So it's not really a problem. But when you have RNA in a vaccine sitting on a shelf, that RNA can start mutating spontaneously and change the instruction that it's carrying. That's why when they first started putting out the vaccines, they were telling everybody to get these incredibly cold freezers. And hospitals and medical care providers didn't want to because they were very expensive, $20,000. So they just said, well, just keep them in a regular refrigerator. And that is where a lot of this damage and danger came from. Uh, I don't think it was intentional. I think it was done for money. Obviously, there's gold in them there shots, um, but I think stupidity and carelessness is really behind most of the COVID vaccine damage. And it's certainly a different, it's a problem out there. There's a lot of people have been hurt. I suffered a vaccine injury myself some years ago, not from COVID, but from something else. And it's definitely negatively impacted my life.
Yeah, I was listening to his name was James something. I actually just sent him an email to see if he wants to come on the show. He was on Redacted with Clayton Morrison. I think he does a great job with his show. And he had this gentleman on. His name was James. Last name eludes me. And he mentioned about how the WHO or WHO had, the weaponization of it, how these corporations are able to effectuate their agenda using these NGOs, and it's just like it's just I don't know how to describe it. It's like wow.
Well, yeah, the NGOs and USA was a gigantic ripoff of the American taxpayer, and we're finding out that some of these aid programs are being looted from within, and very little of the aid actually gets to the intended recipient. They'll say children are starving in thus and such a country, and millions of dollars are donated, and at the end, those kids get maybe a couple of bags of rice. I mean, look what they did in Haiti. I mean, that was horrific.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just funny you mentioned that. I was actually just reading the history of Haiti. It's crazy what happened there. You had obviously the slaves there. Then they did a revolution there. That was, if you read about that was bloody. And then now look at it now. It's run by gangs.
Yes. Well, I'm talking specifically about the Clinton Foundation raising a huge amount of money to build homes for the Haitians after that horrible hurricane. Um, or it was actually an earthquake. I'm sorry. And at the end, only 6 houses were built.
Wow. Well, I hope these were multifamily, 300 unit. uh,
Uh, they're probably just shacks.
yeah. Um, let's see here. What are some other things? I mean, I have your website pulled up here. I mean, you have so many articles that are just fascinating, from ClimateGate to COINTELPRO, Pentagon plane, Big Bang, fake terror, Hawaii. I mean, this is a great website you got.
Well, thank you. And yeah, ClimateGate is another one. I mean, where the government was lying to the people uh, to get us to accept a reduced standard of living so that they could have more. And, Al Gore came on out saying, the world is going to broil and the oceans are going to rise and flood the shore. Then he goes and buys a beachfront house. And, supposedly by 2005, the Arctic was supposed to be ice free. That, of course, did not happen. And one of the games that politicians like to play is take something that occurs naturally, periodically, declare it an absolute emergency, and then offer to sell us a solution.
Absolutely. I was just looking on your website there real quick. 9/11. I don't know if you
Yes.
care to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, at this point, pretty much the majority of people understand that 9/11 was not carried out by a bunch of Middle Eastern people that the U.S. government wanted to make war on. It was a covert operation, and a lot of people benefited from it. I mean, Larry Silverstein, who had the lease on the World Trade Towers, was looking at an EPA mandated renovation to remove the asbestos from the building. And all of a sudden, the planes come along and knock the buildings down, and the government cleans up the mess and takes it away. And Larry gets a huge payout from the insurance, and that's one beneficiary. And of course, George Bush could get out there and say, we've got to go to war against Afghanistan and Iraq and these people who carried out these horrible crimes here. And then a couple of years later, somebody asked him point blank, did Saddam have anything to do with 9/11? And Bush said, no, he didn't. But he was just the sort of person that we needed to be rid of.
Yeah, much kind of like the kind of the Gulf of Tonkin pretext.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's another case where we were lied to. There really were no torpedoes. Um, Of course, Israel was involved in 9/11. There's the famous dancing Israelis uh, who were videotaping the World Trade Towers before the first plane hit. And when it did, they were cheering and clapping and laughing so much that local residents called the police on them. And of course, that videotape has never been declassified because it proves they knew ahead of time what was going to happen.
Could you share your own opinion as to? I mean, obviously, we're like you have certain powers that wanted regime change and a pretext to go over to the Middle East, and military industrial and a myriad of other industries that make that profit from these conflicts. But I mean, I'm just trying to get more granular with that, and I just find it just again, I'm at a loss for words that you had people like that. I mean, that's what I'll go ahead.
Well, getting back to the bankers here, they'll loan you the money at interest to fight a war. And then after the war is over, they'll loan you the money at interest to rebuild everything that was destroyed. So it's another racket for them. Uh, as far as 9/11 is concerned, uh, it has the smell of both Mossad and CIA on it. And again, it was being described as the modern Pearl Harbor, a reason to go off and make war on, I believe it was 7 countries in the Middle East. It didn't do so well in Afghanistan, not doing so well against Iran at the moment. And I think the nation is militarily exhausted. I mean, um, they're about to retire one of the aircraft carriers, and its replacement is still months, if not years, away from completion.
Yeah, I think about the impact of the global war on terrorism and such. I actually I've got two cats I found as kittens abandoned, and one of them I lost, and I couldn't find for a period of time. Well, they've got that next door app where it lets you know, hey, your neighbor found it and such, and went over there. Older man, older woman, beautiful home. They invited me in, and as I was walking to the area where they said where my kitten was at the time, I looked at on the wall to my left, and it was I recognized those faces, and those were faces of 3 men that served in the global war on terrorism. They're all 3 brothers, and 2 of them were killed. It was like something out of Saving Private Ryan, and the third one was retrieved from being on deployment or what have you, and I could still see it. She's, I don't know, probably presumably in her 70s, but I could see that she was still visibly not visibly that she was still really emotionally impacted by that. And I think about all those people who perished.
Yes. Well, the people who rule our world, they don't feel that pain. In fact, I think probably a psychiatrist would say that they're exhibiting clear sociopathic tendencies. They don't care if other people are hurt by what they do. They're just convinced that they're right to do what they're doing, even when they do a major screw up, like this cover up of Epstein.
Wow. Trying to look at what else here I wanted to ask you here. I know I want to be mindful of your time, Michael. Anything else that you feel doesn't receive enough attention, or something that you're a news story you're kind of you're tracking?
Well, I'm trying to keep an eye on the various places in the world that are already in conflict, and not all of it's being reported. In fact, I heard from a friend that there's a border war going on between Thailand and Cambodia, and we don't even see that in the newspapers. So, at what point do we start to say we're in a world war? Israel's bombing Syria. Israel just invaded Lebanon. Israel's attacking Iran. Israel's attacking Gaza. The U.S. is attacking Iran. The U.S. is talking tough with Russia. And I think it's going to be a major mistake to let this happen. And that's been a major part of my focus over the last 30 years. World War III is a really bad idea.
Do you agree? I guess in some respects that we're already in kind of World War III, at least the early stages of it.
Yeah, I think we are. We're just waiting for the big bang that's going to pull them all together into a world war. I mean, if you look at the history of World War II, there were small wars all over the place. The war in Europe, Japan invaded China, Manchuria. Um, And you had all these little wars going on, and then bang, Pearl Harbor, and oh, it's one big war now.
And to your point, it's amazing how much of the wars that we have had throughout history, whether it's been portrayed as religious in nature, whether that's the Crusades or, like French Civil Wars, all these random conflicts or 30 Years War, but that at the heart of it is control of resources and such typically.
Exactly.
Um, and I think it's fascinating. And Alex Craner, been trying to get him on the show, but haven't been able to. But he's fascinating because he talks about how he mentions how banks and corporations use other countries' resources to add on their balance sheet, so then they have collateral to get to do more loans and things of that nature. And just he gets to the
That may
nuances.
be where a lot of that gold from Fort Knox went. It was rehypothecated and put back into the monetary system. Now they can't get it back.
Well, I hear about Basel III or Bretton Woods 2.0. I hear quite a bit about.
Yes. Well, Bretton Woods was basically the price that Roosevelt demanded Winston Churchill pay to get the U.S. into the war against Germany. And Churchill held out for as long as he could, but then he relented. The U.S. entered the war against Germany by way of Pearl Harbor. And at the conclusion of the war, the British pound sterling gave up its role as the global reserve currency, and that role shifted to the United States dollar.
And from what I've gathered from people, it's kind of a double-edged sword to be the reserve currency. I know it's advantageous in some ways, and it's benefited the American consumers, perhaps in the immediate post-decades, post-World War II. But it also has other implications apart from inflating and hurting others outside of the U.S.
Well, that's where you get this whole attitude of the ugly American. And yeah, the post war years were a golden time. And one of the reasons was even though at Bretton Woods, the Federal Reserve had promised not to print more banknotes than they had gold to cover it, then they turned around and started doing just that. And they were buying all these products from other countries. And finally, France was looking at this huge stack of paper notes from the US and invoked its right under Bretton Woods to exchange it for gold, which back then was $35 an ounce. Richard Nixon realized they didn't have the gold to cover all those notes from France, let alone anybody else, and delinked the dollar from gold. It was called the Nixon shock, and devastating economic effects for pretty much the whole world.
And as it relates to, call it WW3, it seems, given all the interviews I've had with people, just my own thoughts, that you have certain groups in the world, alphabet agencies, et cetera, that want to foment a kinetic conflict. They want it. And it seems that if they're hell-bent on getting it, they'll damn well get it. What are
Yes,
your
unfortunately,
thoughts on that?
that's exactly what Eisenhower warned us about. If your business is war, then war is good for business. And the idea is constant war, endless war, and use it to drain money from the general population to give to the military contractors and the military itself. And nobody wants that to go away. In the movie JFK, Donald Sutherland played a character called Mr. X, which is thought to have been based on Fletcher Prouty. And he was saying, yeah, the reason these wars crank up here, before Vietnam, there was no war, there was no money. And then they go into Vietnam, and all of a sudden, money's falling out of the sky all over the Pentagon and the defense contractors.
Hey, so unfortunately, the rest of the video got cut off. That being said, I encourage you to check out Michael's website, which is called whatreallyhappened.com. It's a great resource, and there's really just a lot of great articles on there that help you better understand the world that we live in. So again, that's called whatreallyhappened.com. Appreciate you watching and for those of you who have subscribed. And if you have other guests that you'd like me to bring on the show, please let me know. And looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback. Thanks.